Ye gods, assist my poor recitation. Ye inspired muses, lend me your hand.
President Higgins, you have always understood the power of the word to right injustice, to highlight abuses, and to call for a better world. You have been exemplary in your own service to your country and to the international community as a strong and eloquent voice for the voiceless. On this stage of the Irish Arts Centre, in the name of Eugene O'Neill, and on behalf of the Irish American writers and artists, it is my honour to present this award to you. Go Romila Mayagat.
Lenape people, native people to this area, keep my brew a cojialiog. Erengedolcious as mainland Mawikas, O Kriya, Gawaliad, Asas, and Firkin Fulsha, and Irish of Rohane is Remaban, Hela, Sardine. August is auch called Kilurok, Toin Kart, Garvimer and Shahana, and Kedur in Uravi, Tosulor, Yana there and Tuker and Tovak, is on Tarno, and Fish, Björnok, Tussara, or gone of the creek now, because all of a sudden, Bertha, they will play up and listen. Say, Lily Glela, Kursi, Dromjok, Kursi, Corellover, the Snaharena, go will she create numbers 3 Sliam Cockdana, or a Wintaka. New one Yeltson, Natan Shah, Yeltson, the Ganohak, Casavisha, or queer another stock, Sna, Björta to Eme. May I just say my first greeting to the native people of the area, which is awfully important, and I just want to thank Brenton Costello and all of those, and thank all of those speakers for their warm and generous remarks. I very much appreciate them. And I want to say that when people are speaking about my contribution to the art, I really prefer myself to speak about my relationship with the arts, because I have gained more from my community, involvement in the community. I remember all of the work that's referred to from 93 to 97 had been preceded by a long period as chairman of the Galway Mayo Regional Arts Committee, and with other people we had a campaign which was about access for art, the Benson report, which laid out an outline about what one should be doing to achieve access for everybody. And then we had CAFE, which was Creative Arts for Everyone. And we dealt with an issue then on that occasion, in many cases, to really making that stage, it was still alive, the argument that if you did anything for the community arts, we were reducing excellence of the arts overall. It's something that isn't entirely dead, you hear it occasionally. I say all of this just to say is that when I was involved with the arts in different ways and all the rest of it, having in fact that experience of being in the community of advocacy and having had the experience of listening to people who were putting forward plans that could happen, it enabled me to do things very, very quickly with others. I'm so pleased that we're here this evening. I'm so pleased to hear these generous remarks that have been made, and I wish you all very, very well in your own practice. I'm looking forward to later to be a dear friend of Sabina's and mine, Martin Hayes, but I honour all artists who have been present. And I think it's a great title, this Irish American Artists Association. And I think that it is appropriate. About my interesting approach to the arts always has been that fundamentally that it was part of citizenship, and therefore it was very important to defend issues of access, and the importance of the cultural space, and the importance of the public performance and being able to listen, if you like, to the arts in their different form and to view rather like we can hear this evening. I should say I have never divided the arts from the general category of our duty, our responsibility to humanity, la humanidad. And I'm here in New York to attend the Summit of the Future of the United Nations at the invitation of Secretary General Gutierrez. And when I spoke yesterday, I stressed how we need it now more than ever, a truly representative United Nations that is able to respond to our interactive crises in global poverty, hunger, all of the interacting crises in social justice, in economy and migration, in ecology. World leaders, as has been suggested, are attempting to resuscitate the Sustainable Development Goals. And I made reference to that atmosphere that was created with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. It was as if a sense of hope began to radiate throughout humanity, and that we were open to making changes. And we must never forget that it came after the global Millennium Development Goals, to which commitment had been made but which not been achieved. And our meeting that we've been having over these last few days is to suggest that this time words must be in fact succeeded by actions that give meaning to authenticity. And we need authenticity to recover trust. And I think one of the reasons, therefore, when we, in many cases, I mentioned how important it is that we don't allow ourselves to be desensitized by the images of so many unnecessary deaths of civilians and citizens that are on our screens every day. Or indeed that we surrender to a discourse of fear or of war. We are, I think, tomorrow morning, heads of state and government will meet for the official opening of the General Assembly. Yes, this time challenges us because we are going to meet tomorrow at a time of threatening multiple conflicts, of enormous challenges regarding escalating regional conflicts, where in fact words have not failed to try to prevent such escalation, enormous food security, and of course global poverty, deepening inequalities within and between nations. Children are dying on the new screens of the world. We think especially of the distressing continuing scenes from Gaza as we approach the first anniversary of the dreadful events of October the 7th, and what has flowed from the response to those events. These are difficult and painful issues, but it is critical that we address them clearly and openly, and that we recognize and take into ourselves the moral significance of action in action, of words or of silence. And I know that these issues fall not only on the heads of state, but on all of our populations. I do think that when we had that moment in 2015, it was a moment of celebratory, rare global consensus about the need to craft new models of human development and security, founded on ethics and critical thinking, and centering indeed, as you have mentioned, on human rights, derechos humanos, and dignity, that implored us to think long and bear in mind the needs not only of those who currently dwell on this planet, but also of those yet to come. So it must be our hope at the meeting together this week that heads of state and government will make commitments to new measures that will bolster collective efforts to guarantee that the Sustainable Development Goals are achieved by 2030. But an enhanced effort is necessary if we're to recover, as I've said, the authenticity of action and words, that is, will help trust among the publics of the world and enable us to recover the aim of an inclusive global multilateral discourse, one that might deliver peace, sustainability, confront so many of what are shared challenges for present and future generations. It isn't a time for fear. It is a time for us returning through mind and heart to asking how we can do things differently, so that, for example, we are about the tasks of peace and sharing efforts and confronting challenges that are global and must be shared, rather than, in fact, speaking about countries' strength in terms of capacity to access weapons of destruction. And the task we have been given as heads of state and government by the UN Secretary General is to bring a United Nations into being, and related institutions in relation to what might be called the Bretton Woods institutions in the past, that will be able to deliver and can deliver on all of these issues: political, social, economic, and most importantly, ecological. I think we must use all the tools available to us, including a new way of looking. For example, I will be advocating myself a return to old instruments of oppression, colonization. They can be used in a new way: anthropology, economics, issues of development, redefined in a way that can in fact give us an entirely new version of the world, and all of these concepts redefined. I want to say I have called to this, and I've told this, it's as if we are seeking to recover from a globalization from above without responsibility and consequences to social impact, by replacing it with a globalization from below. We will seek to respect the humanity in each other and the importance of difference and the importance of histories. I say that artists, including writers such as O'Neill, and I'm so honoured that the Irish American Writers Association, in fact, are represented here. But artists have always been better at thinking long. And I reflected on this honour that you offered me tonight and the work of Eugene O'Neill. I thought, yes, I have spoken on a number of occasions, including the launch of the distinguished biography of him. But it is interesting that I think too, when I say that writers have they've paid a price for it. I think there is not only the rich body of his work there and the appropriateness of we recognizing his Irish heritage, but I thought the themes themselves are very, very important. In 1936, when the Nobel Prize was being given to Eugene O'Neill, the citation said that it was being given to Eugene Gladstone O'Neill, called for the power, honesty, and deep-felt emotions of his dramatic work, which embody an original concept of tragedy. Now that is very, very interesting because, of course, any of us who are honest in relation to the work of O'Neill and his life is that there was an incredible price paid not only by him, but many associated with him, for his alcoholism and also for his violence, and I don't seek to evade that. But what I think is very interesting, and I thought of it for a long, long time ago, and that was in his facing the many facets of the human condition, yielding at times to real despair. I thought, for example, well, of course, the unique accomplishment in the publication of A Long Day's Journey tonight, premiered in Stockholm. But I also was moved very much, I think, by the dialogue in A Long Day's Journey in tonight, and not forgetting, of course, Elizabeth Taylor's playing Martha. And I think here we have, I think, something very challenging, an extraordinary complexity and darkness of the text. But there is also, and I think it is very important, we're asked in dealing with O'Neill's work to muster up a stark ability to face and interrogate many of the difficult themes of play, but also of life itself, with its many fallings down and getting up again and revisions. And it is relevant to acknowledge his own unflinching and so often failing attempts at authenticity as we consider our responsibilities as global leaders, as stewards of this planet, and as citizens. I said to somebody today, as in fact we are at my age, and the rest of you come back to discussing the Sustainable Development Goals after the non-achievement of the Millennium Development Goals. It is perhaps part of the difficulty that we have taken the great issues of humanity and of the right to live and be free and so forth, and made it an abstraction. And in making it an abstraction, removed some of the moral responsibility for action, and thus we can sink and lapse into complicit silences on what we should have spoken about. The Irishness in Eugene O'Neill's work, when the Union Society took the significant decision to hold its first meeting at Richard outside the United States in Clifton, County Galway, was due very, very much to the influence of such as Professor Nelson O'Callaghan Ritchell and his colleagues for their initiative. And he's here with us this evening. I'm so pleased and for offering such a valuable opportunity to reflect upon the impact of O'Neill's Irish psyche on his dramatic work. And I'm so pleased that Nelson is with us this evening. Nelson was also very, very, very significant in the meetings we had on George Bernard Shaw. And in the contemporary writing, his work on playwrights of the period of the Irish Revolution were not just only on Shaw, but also in Shaw's and Yeats, in relation to John Millington Synge, in relation to Eugene O'Neill, and all of this. And for example, the extraordinary atmosphere that must have prevailed when among the different revolutions, including Portrait Pierce and James Connolly, they were all present at a lecture on Ibsen in London. And it's very interesting, and it is important historically that people realise why is it that Ibsen was so popular to those who had the most sensitive souls, particularly where Nelson has made a contribution, Sean O'Casey, which is so reflected in the interaction between his work and between the Citizen Army and those great tragedies. Eugene O'Neill, yes, belongs to both the literary canons of America and Ireland, but they're reflective of not just that, but in particular of an aspect of human life that is, in fact, perhaps being badly served by the social sciences, and I'm speaking of the transience that is at the heart of migration. I think the migratory experience and the uses and abuses of memory are really the strong contributions that still stay with me. Recognition of the migrant experience, as I've said, in many cases why it has not been well served in the social sciences, because there is an assumption that the world is sedentary, when in fact people have been moving all of the time. In 1901, the majority of the people who were born on the island of Ireland were living outside the island of Ireland. People have been moving, but assumption is in many cases, and it's not unassociated with notions of property and possession, that somehow or another you're in the one place. And recognition of that migrant experience, as I've said, has not, the success has been in literature, and you have it there where in fact that transience is caught on the writings. It's caught in the writings in the near modern period of people like McGahern, but Mickey McGahern, but also, for example, in relation to the one of the people who've written about seasonal migration. And also, because I had written Long Day's Journey tonight, there is something that is fascinating and associated with it. The kind of violence that is associated with dealing with the transitory and so forth, because people are thrown closely together. That proximity in turn changes both the nature of the text and the nature of the writing. And I think that the violence that emanates from intimacies and intricacies of the migrant experience are essential in O'Neill. The sense of vulnerability that is involved in balancing the necessary myths of the past, all with life as lived, they're so well depicted by O'Neill. And it's something I think that it is perhaps will last very, very, very much. I think very often it changes this, and it changes the notion that the voices are presented as almost as if they're shouting from below, which raises another issue, which is, of course, that Eugene O'Neill's difficulties were not unassociated with the conventions of the stage, that felt that references to violence should become off stage and should be by allusion rather than directly. And this is something O'Neill experienced in relation to the production of his own works, as Tom Murphy would experience when writing as a young man in his 20s in London. In many cases, the Home Secretary would write, I think the two great people at the time were Hart Hobson and Kenneth Tynan. And one said they wouldn't like to meet Mr. Murphy after dark. And the other would say that if, in fact, there were any Irishmen walking in London at night, that the Home Secretary would not have done his job. And as President of Ireland, Sabine and I were there when we saw several ovations coming to the restaging of our friend Tom Murphy's work. But it shows in the same way in many cases. This was the case very, very much, of course, in the United States. There was also a class element involved in it. And I think when Bruce Kennedy is sent by father to look at the production of the Playboy of the Western World by the Irish Players in 1911. And in the note back to the mayor, it says that really the issue is that all the old prejudice of the Yankees against us, dirt, laziness, drunkenness, and all of that, all presented on stage and so forth. And this was an issue, in fact, in many cases, when in 1911, as early as 1911, when Eugene O'Neill had to deal with this. And that was, what is appropriate? What should you hide from the stage? And what should you reveal as appropriate as the indication of the fullness and the complexity and the vexatious nature of life? I think too that when I mentioned memory is something in which I had a particular interest. In relation to the structure of memory, personal memory, survivor's memory, communal memory, and preceding this in cases, what might be forms of myth that are sustaining, some that are necessary to continue a great truth, such as the issue of dispossession, for example, or exile in a classic sense. But I think there is another sense, in a way, where the uses and abuses of memory. It is because people are living by fragile myths that are sources of vulnerability. Rather like a woman who once said to me, we were great people, 40 bullocks dancing on the lawn. And I think of all of this that people invent pasts of not only for themselves but for their ancestors, which create a kind of vulnerability that enables in that those exchanges in the long day's journey, but in that undermining the memory by which the other person has sustained. You can use it like a scalpel, which O'Neill did in his extraordinary way. The contest as well, for which versions of a constructed version of communal memory is material not just for art, but for life. And it was central to O'Neill, as it was sourced indeed and related to his relationship with his father, and as it would be to his children. I have suggested in the previous pieces I wrote that the part of the legacy of Eugene O'Neill is therefore, I think, in new ground he carved out for the use of memory as the stuff of transactional conscience, as not being ever simply an invocation of anything shared for the purposes of establishing a setting, but really also in the dialogue, as I said, that scalpel will fall most urgently on proximate interactions as instruments that are really different forms of delivery of what is available for the psychic destruction of a protagonist, an invocation, as it were, or reliance on memory being threatened. His influence is deep and widespread, and Declan Calvert is right when we were at that conference in Clifton as well, in concluding with saying, you can see the influence, for example, on Tom Murphy's A Whistle in the Dark, where he said, carnies rise up, champions of the world. So you have the carnies in Tom Murphy, and you have the melodies in Eugene, and Brian Friel's he to a different view. And then you have, as it were, the fog and the foghorns that are a leitmotif in Behan's The Querfellow, and then New Lily Golan's poetic sequence, The 50-Minute Mermaid. As well as the vulnerable, the voices of the excluded are heard, shouting from below, but also in settings where there is an intensity of experience, because it is of the nature of the sedentary and the property gifted in a way, that there must be restraint to protect it all. And therefore, in those voices from below, in the uncertain spaces, there is the possibility of sensual excess. And therefore that also comes through, and it is perhaps ephemeral, but it is also something profoundly human, even for the shortness of its space. And it is so much in the best tradition of Chekhov. O'Neill, it is often quoted as the saying about the one thing that explains more than anything about me is the fact that I'm Irish. I should say that when he did say that, the longer paragraph also said, I'm not very much interested in joining academies, but an academy that would include Shaw, Casey and Wilde is an academy to which I would dearly belong, and he could become an associate member because he had not been born in Ireland. I think that the migrant sensibility is a valuable sensibility. O'Neill understood this, and writing about his family's adopted home, the United States, as he had found it, not as he wished it to be found, and of all those arguments about property, thus inspiring countless members of subsequent generations of Irish Americans to do the same. Some of whom are present here this evening, having drawn on that deep, rich well of migratory experience, just as O'Neill did through his acclaimed artistry. One of the published articles to which has been attributed to myself misquotes, I think, the Irish Times. It's unfair to the Irish. It was the London Times who said, they will never let us forget it, and they're going to one of the most developed countries in the world, and they will continue to remind us of it. And they were speaking, of course, of the famine experience, and O'Neill is quite close to the famine experience, and it is a major influence. Let me finish by saying this. In a life without the contribution of artists, of public opportunities for sharing cultural experiences of the fullness of life, of being lifted to transcendence by performance in the many forms of the arts, such a life would be so much diminished existence. I believe it would constitute a far from a fulfilling encounter with life. And when we support artists, and I was part of a debate that took place in Australia and New Zealand, one arguing, for example, that the economy is cold and rational, and that the arts are soft and sensitive, and therefore they cannot be in paradigms of intellectual life combined. I joined with a New Zealand writer who rejected this, and that certainly the first one would suggest in many cases is that you can support the arts when you have surplus. The argument I mentioned in many cases is the argument that the experience of the arts is so important that it is a crucial part of formation, fulfillment, and citizenship. So therefore, it is to be public, accessible, and as free as possible. I think that there's understanding the arts then, if you accept that as a crucial vehicle for active citizen participation. It is never appropriate that they be treated as something peripheral or even dispensable. And I think too often it has happened that many artists have been allowed to sink into poverty and related ill health. Others have been forced to choose between having a family and giving expression to their gift, or have been forced to reflect on what it is to flourish without material security. And then too there is another thing we have to be very wary of, and that is the suggestion that the arts are about eventing. There is so much more than eventing. Yes, certainly they may constitute a valuable tool of tourism or commerce, but we must never forget that the arts have their own integrity and independence and must be respected as such, recognizing this as a fundamental for policymakers. As a former minister with responsibility for this area, I found it very difficult dealing with this challenge of administration. Let us assert and reassert pure values and communicate to those in power and influence of the intrinsic value of culture of the arts. Irish America evolved over several migrations and through its artistic community. In that it has been essential to the preservation of our language, music and literature, and to our grasp of our own history. And it gives me such pleasure that there has been so much attention being paid to Corsicanga as culturally general. In particular, our understanding of post-famine Ireland. We wouldn't know really of the full significance of post-famine Ireland in the late 19th century if it had not been for a wonderful set of Irish American scholars who wrote about land and church and belief and migration. And we owe so much to the Irish American artistic and cultural practitioners who pioneered Irish studies and scholarship. And I'm glad that the Centre now not only celebrates some of our most distinguished and recognised artists, but is programming new, exciting and contemporary works created in Ireland today, such as the Irish Dance Company. And dance needs privileging for many reasons. Visual artists like Alice Maher and Rachel Farrell's work, which stands behind me, that striking map. Leonard Muldoon's picnic masterclasses in the Inland Poets, harp and fiddle and so much more. So this evening is Archive Teluriki. Yes, we celebrate this inviting new space for the arts, New York, but we celebrate too the power and transcendence of the arts and culture in all our lives. The emancipatory potential the arts hold and can offer us all as we search for an alternative to war and conflict, to the largely unquestioned hegemonic paradigm under which we live that has proven so socially and ecologically ruinous, so that we may gain a new resonance with each other, with nature, indeed with all those with whom we inhabit our shared vulnerable planet that is in peril. Marfocal Square, Gwyn Gofrog, Spanant and Tau Cri, Gachdana, Amek, Faimo and Shop, Corsi, Riracon, New Erin Storche. May I wish all of you who are here this evening well, and may this building in which we stand may become a vital setting in which to celebrate the work from both established and emerging artists and cultural practitioners, providing audiences with emotionally and intellectually engaging experiences, not only of success but of vulnerability in an environment of Irish hospitality. This dream of developing the Irish Arts Centre into a modern facility becoming a reality, it is now, of course, hugely proud to the world, and Sabine and I are so pleased to have been invited to be back with you on its completion. As to the award itself, an award in the name of Eugene O'Neill for International Public Service Award. It's an award that is so meaningful, and we must never forget, in many cases, the pain and the price, and the agonistic loneliness that is often there and necessary in the bringing of a piece of new work for public consumption. But it's never consumption. It really is for the emancipation of all those who have open minds and who have what is most important for a respect for performance. Mavrikas Levega,